care for your place. There's any number of ways, to care. And the second one is give thanks. And giving thanks is something that our culture kind of ignores. Not everybody, and not as a totality, but I think it's underemphasized in our culture. When I harvest plants with Native people, the giving thanks is so vital and integral and not forgotten, not overlooked, because that appreciation, it breeds good thoughts, and good thoughts breed good actions. And life is too complex to make a couple simple rules and say, if you take 1/3 of the plant, or you take 1 of every 4, you can't make a simple rule like that and pretend that it's always going to apply, because in some of the plants it's not going to apply at all. But the appreciation that makes you look and care, makes you figure out the right decision, and also makes you make the right decision. When you care, all of a sudden you can't ignore what feels right to you. If you have no connection to nature, it doesn't matter what feels right and what feels wrong, because you don't have a feeling of right or wrong. It's just green stuff, But those of us who gather, we all feel that right or wrong, and we want to apply ourselves. We all want to apply ourselves towards our landscape in the correct way. So, I believe that the people that think that foraging is destructive to the environment are affected by a mythology of civilization. The mythology that the basic ethic towards land is replace it, destroy it, and replace it with something productive and something useful. And this is so deeply ingrained in civilization that you don't have to go back very far until you find it explained in almost exactly those terms in historical writing about the civilization of the American frontier was exactly that. Take this landscape, destroy this landscape, and replace it with something that's productive and useful. And inherent in that is some assumptions. One is that the landscape itself is not productive and useful. And why do we believe natural landscapes are not productive and useful? Because civilization itself is built upon the control of people by controlling their food supply. And if you have people with a robust and varied food supply that know how to use that food supply, you cannot control those people. And so not only was the knowledge of wild foods and medicines suppressed, or was it not valued, it was actively and vehemently suppressed. It's part of what the whole idea of the horror of witchcraft from the Middle Ages was about, rooting that knowledge out of a peasant population of Europe to make sure that they could not provide for themselves and had to be dependent on an oppressive system. And we carry that today into our view of ecology and our view of nature into what I call, or I'm not going to take credit for this, there's an ethnoecologist named Kat Anderson, she's in California, who's been somewhat influential to me. She recently retired to take care of her mom, but she taught at, I forget which university.
UC Davis.
Yes, she taught at UC Davis for quite a while. But she calls this nature schizophrenia, right? There's only 2 things you can do with nature. You either leave it alone and don't touch it, or you remove it and then you make something useful out of it. And so what I found so fascinating about Lisa Novick's article in the Huffington Post was that after just telling us that foraging was horrible and would destroy nature, then she told us that instead of that, what we need to do was take farmland and recreate natural landscapes on it. Then we would produce butterfly habitat, bird habitat, and food. And I was thinking, wait a second. You're telling me that if I gather the wild stuff in a natural landscape, I am, 1, destroying it, and 2, that it isn't productive enough to support that. But then you're telling me that as a human being, I can go create from scratch a better landscape? And my improved natural landscape is now going to support my harvest because nature couldn't handle it. Nature's too fragile. Nature's just a wine cup sitting on a railing, and if you bump it, it falls off and it shatters, and you cut your feet, and everything's a problem. But as long as you do it our way, and you leave nature alone, but make your separate nature, and you control the nature, then you can gather all you want. That's ridiculous. And I could say that she's my enemy if I wanted to be angry about it. But I realize she cares about the same thing I care about. She's just that shadow of civilization. It's just kind of settled over her thoughts to where she can't see straight. And so part of what I want to talk about is seeing straight about what nature really is. Because we have this myth that humans are separate, right? So think about this. Nature gave birth to us. Nature gives life to us. Nature gives food to us. It's the only place we've ever belonged, but now we don't belong. So we belonged for hundreds of thousands of years, but now we don't belong. Now, keep our hands off of the nature. We'll just dichotomize the world. Nature, don't touch it. Not nature, man-made landscape, touch it, get everything you need there. Well, it's no wonder that if we decide nature is either a virgin or a whore, we cannot find the marriage in between. It's no wonder that we are so confused. And I used to have a roommate who thought that way. And he's my age and still single because he's never figured it out. He's never figured it out. And that doesn't make me hate him. It makes me feel sorry for what he's missing. So these people they're not our enemies, the people that run the nature center that I'm not going to name that say you can leave an edible plant walk here as long as nobody picks anything. Even a dandelion in a lawn. So they can mow it. I can't eat it. Right. Okay, so let me see if I have some notes here. Let's see if there's something important I missed that I was going to say. Yeah, I think well, as far as these myths of civilization, one of them that we sometimes have trouble with is that the idea that gathering and tending don't mix, right? We have this idea that there's nature. Again, it's this dichotomy. Nature you leave alone. So if you're gathering, like me, I like to forage, right? So I'm gathering. That means that I'm gathering from like an untouched landscape or a landscape that humans aren't intentionally managing. And then there's cultivation. And cultivation is when you make the landscape. And this idea that you can cultivate a landscape that's natural is like, wait a second, that doesn't really cultivate natural. Like our view of the world does not include humans in nature, so cultivating a natural landscape makes no sense. But that is the perception that native people that lived in non-civilized economies, they all looked at the landscape that way. We have examples all over the world of it. When Europeans first settled parts of the Pacific Northwest, they found these beautiful meadows with this pretty blue flower all over these rich coastal areas that had oftentimes scattered Gary oak. And it never occurred to them that that was nature, and it was beautiful, but it was also a farm. Because it was something in between. These were the managed camas meadows that the native people in the Pacific coast use as their staple food. Other landscapes, now the camas meadows were managed mostly for one food plant, but on the coast, they had much more complex communities of plants that were managed. And archaeologists think that this didn't exist because they have no evidence of it, because you don't create a levee, you don't create a canal, you don't create a temple, so they think, well, no, this couldn't happen because there's no evidence that it happened. There's no stone piles telling us it happened. But when you look at native cultures, you see that virtually all of them that are supposedly hunters and gatherers, they all had ways that they interacted really carefully with their landscapes. In fact, white settlers were really confused that when they brought potatoes to the Pacific Northwest, some of the traders and the people, the various native people up there were like, "Oh, potatoes, that's pretty awesome," you know. And so then the settlers come back like 4 years later, and these people had like potato gardens. And they were like, now how did they know how to have a garden? Because if they were smart and they knew how to have a garden, they would have become farmers thousands of years ago. And this is the perception which archaeologists have looked at forever, right? As soon as people were smart enough to have a farm, they just started the farming. Well, before civilization forced people to farm and give their labor, the wealth of their labor away to the elites in society, people had these mixed economies with all sorts of complex systems for feeding themselves that were really resilient and not so prone to starvation. And that's what I want to talk about is this idea of what I call ecoculture. Cultivating the ecosystem that you live in, that you call home. So I'm going to finally turn this projector on and show you a few things. So I guess that means it has to get dimmer in here, right? Otherwise, what will we be able to see? Oh, I don't have to turn it on. There's a little, it's actually mechanical. It's pretty cool. There's a mechanical thing here. It's a little sliding plastic piece. Oh, it's not on though. Uh-oh. Now we got past the mechanical part and I'm going to have trouble. I probably went to sleep, yeah. It says, the output, the application. Okay, hang on me. I'm reading it, okay, sorry. Okay. To output audio from the computer. I don't want any audio. Like I need audio. So, one of the myths of civilization that nature is not productive. Nature will not provide for us. Nature doesn't provide for us in exactly the same way. And I'm not going to tell you that all the 7 billion people or so on the world could just be like, okay, we'll just go in the woods and get all of our food. But nature provides a lot of food. We are sometimes misled to believe that most of the world is either farmland or urbanized. North America is 12% farmland or urban. And the rest of it is wild land under some sort of management, mismanagement, or non-management. And that could be grazed land, it could be national forest, it could be desert, it could be the boreal forest. But this is close to my sugar bush. There's an old growth stand of sugar maple, and I kind of use this as a model for how I want to manage my sugar bush, because this is food. Virtually everything in this landscape is food. Probably 80% of the herbaceous biomass is wild leek, and about 80% of the forest canopy is sugar maple. And now that's not how all forests are or all forests should be, but by trying to achieve something like this on my property that produces lots and lots of food for people, I'm not harming the ecology. I'm taking a stand that was logged in 1968 and originally had hemlock. The hemlock was actually removed in the 30s for tanning, and then the hardwoods were cut in 1968, and so I have a dense second growth of sugar maple. Because it had a lot of hemlock, it doesn't have many wild leeks, but now it's sugar maple, so I'm asking nature, what does it want to become? What is this land most likely or most apt to produce? It's mostly sugar maple and white ash now. I'm managing it for a density of sugar maple like this, and I'm working on expanding my wild leeks and some of the other plants I have there. But it's an astoundingly productive landscape. A person could make a living off of 40 acres of maple forest just with wild leeks and maple sugar or maple syrup sustainably. And this is something we're taught not possible.